Good afternoon. Welcome to the Standing Committee of Social Development meeting with the public meeting with the Commander Officer, G Division, Superintendent Zettler, and Superintendent Jones. Before we start the meeting, I'm going to ask Mr. O'Reilly to open up with a prayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you wish to experience peace, provide peace for another. If you wish to know you are safe, cause another to know that they are safe. If you wish to understand seemingly incomprehensible things, help another to understand. If you wish to heal your own sadness or anger, seek to heal the sadness or anger of another. Dalai Lama.
Thank you. Mr. O'Reilly. At this time, I will get the committee to introduce themselves, starting to my left.
Good afternoon, Frederick Blake, MLA for Mackenzie Delta. Welcome.
Good afternoon, I'm Tom Bollier, MLA from Tuneda Willowday.
Danny McNeely, Satu.
Good afternoon, Michael Natalie, MLA for Dextro. Welcome.
Welcome, Julie Green, Yellowknife Centre.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Welcome, Shane Thompson, Nahende. On my left is Megan Welsh, our policy analyst, and on my right is Gail Bennett, our clerk of the committee. At this point in time, I'm going to turn the floor over to the Chief Superintendent, Zettler, sorry, and I'll turn it over to you and introduce yourself and your colleague, and then if you have a presentation, we'll go from there.
Thank you very much. As indicated, my name is Jamie Zettler. I'm the commanding officer for G Division, the Northwest Territories. I have with me, beside me, is Superintendent Amanda Jones. She is the criminal operations officer for G Division, and we're both posted here in Yellowknife and responsible for policing in the Northwest Territories. The Northwest Territories, the GNWT, is responsible for the administration of justice, including policing all communities. This work happens within a complex framework of federal and territorial legislation. Policing services are provided through a bilateral agreement with Public Safety Canada and the territorial government, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as the service provider. An overview of this presentation will be divided into 7 sections that cover the RCMP's involvement in the Northwest Territories in communities large and small. The sections will delve into a number of topics such as community relations, including community action plans, policing in small communities, the public complaint process, and operational communication centers, in addition to updating on a few key areas where the RCMP is seeing changes to its policies and practices surrounding family violence and sexual assault investigation. Altogether, the RCMP maintains 21 detachments in the Northwest Territories, along with 2 satellite offices in Gamity and Wrigley. The RCMP serves 33 communities across the territory, employing about 260 employees between the 3 categories of employees: regular member, civilian members, and public servants. Included in this is 4 members identified as Aboriginal community constable programs that serve in the communities of Bay Choco, Fort Simpson, Inuvik, and Fort Goodhope. As well, G Division also has federally funded employees that address the federal mandate within the territory of Northwest, or within the boundaries of Northwest Territories. In 2017, G Division received just over 36,000 calls for service, a total of just over 18,000 criminal code violations. Examining these incidents further, we see that violent criminal code violations made up approximately 20% of the violations. Property crime violations made up approximately 48%. Other violations made up approximately 31%. Overall, G Division had a weighted clearance rate of 65%, which is second in the country. On violent offenses, we are seeing a clearance rate of 80%. which again is second in the country. Of the 36,000 calls for service, approximately 23% were non-offense calls for service.
Okay, sorry, Ms. Green?
Could I ask a question of clarification about what a clearance rate is? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Chief Superintendent Zettler?
Sure, our clearance rate is through the investigation, we have either identified somebody that we've charged, we were able to charge, and for various reasons through discretion of the police, a charge wasn't laid, or we were able to identify the suspect, and for whatever reason, whether it be a victim or a process, a charge was not laid.
Thank you. Chief Superintendent Zettler, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much. The next section that I'm going to talk about is the RCMP's commitment to engaging within communities across the Northwest Territories. What works in one community doesn't necessarily work in another. Police work always starts at the community level, and as such, our detachment commanders and members are encouraged to develop strong relationships with local leaderships so that the police priorities reflect local priorities. Because what works in one community won't work in all. Focused on unique needs of the communities. Accordingly, every detachment police priorities are expected to be established through consultation with community leaders and signed off by the local community leadership. Community action plans. The detachments and the community develop community action plans in partnership to enable them to work together to address these priorities, with crime prevention being key. Support collaborative and coordinated approach. Supporting communities to become involved in the justice system and take responsibilities for their own behavior is also key to this process. Collaboration and coordination creates links between the RCMP and communities, which are vital to our success. Each detachment works with the community on restorative justice, victim service programs, as they are important programs to the RCMP. Lastly, officers are encouraged to consult, develop strong relationships with local leaders so they know what the community wants. This allows our RCMP to make adjustments to our policing plans based on what works for the community. As stated, communities is the core of the RCMP's emphasis on community policing. And as such, we encourage all of our detachments members to engage in community activities across the territories. This includes being active in local clubs, sporting events, school activities, and community activities. The RCMP and G Division has raised over $100,000 through various functions such as regimental balls, hockey games, golf tournaments for local charities over the last year. Members are encouraged to meet with their local leaders, chiefs, councils, and elders in order to build a strong relationship with the communities they are serving. Each detachment has a community cultural orientation package that is unique to that community, and every member newly posted to the community must engage in that package. In G Division, all RCMP employees, no matter what their category of employment is, are required to take an online Aboriginal First Nations awareness course to enhance their cultural awareness and understanding of cultural practice. I have a commanding officers Aboriginal Advisory Committee, with representations from each area of the territory, that meets a minimum of twice a year to discuss the relationship between the RCMP and Aboriginal communities. This year, each detachment is also working on an act of reconciliation. I understand that providing policing services to small communities is always a topic of interest for the communities in the territories and the MLAs. G Division has made changes in the creation of policing priorities as a result of feedback in trying to provide better services to our smaller communities and ensure the priorities are being addressed. Currently, as you know, several communities receive policing services from the nearest RCMP detachment. The ideal is to promote relationships building between the officers and the communities and consistency in service delivery. Officers conduct regular patrols, sometimes daily, to small communities. For example, 6th Czech Region receives police patrols from the detachment at Fort McPherson. Jean Marie River receives patrols from Fort Simpson Detachment. Policing resources have been provided, so there are dedicated positions developed to provide this service to communities in Gamity and Wrigley as well. Police officers respond to calls for service from the local detachments, while specialized units and other members are available if extra support is needed. These detachments also initiate and participate in many community policing activities, such as school visits, community presentations, and attending meetings with leaderships and residents of the community. The RCMP and the GNWT are committed to providing quality service delivery for communities that do not have an RCMP detachment in their respective community. Their operational model outlines targets for detachments that provide these policing services. This allows each community to work with the detachment responsible to ensure input from the local community regarding needs and issues. Identifying policing needs and issues. Identifying the policing needs and issues affecting the communities by open and regular communications between the detachment and the leaderships within the communities. Enhancing the service delivery by working with the communities to provide a model that works with their respective communities. Partnerships have been established between the RCMP members and their respective community leaders to assist with police service delivery. Detachments in partnership with their community leaders identify and develop the policing priorities for their communities and work together to develop their community's action plans. The detachment then submits a monthly report to the community leadership outlining the calls for service, their identified policing priorities, community policing activities, notable occurrences, and number of patrols. These reports are also submitted to the GNWT. Public and internal trust is vital to the organizational success of the RCMP in the territory. This requires RCMP employees to undertake and perform their duties and responsibilities with the highest level of integrity. Ethical leadership is a responsibility that rests with each of us. Every day in the performance of our duties, in decisions we make, as well as how we treat one another and members of the public. Effective handling of complaints is a fundamental attribute to an ethical police service. The employees of the RCMP are committed to our communities through unbiased and respectful treatment of all people, accountability, mutual problem solving, cultural sensitivity, enhancement of public safety, partnerships and consultation, open and honest communication, effective and efficient use of resources, and quality and timely services. If there are concerns regarding policing services, the public complaints can be made at the local detachment or online at the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. Public complaints are generally investigated by senior RCMP officers within G Division. If an individual is not satisfied with the results of an investigation, they can ask for a review by the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. It is the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission is an independent agency created to ensure public complaints are examined fairly and impartial, and is not part of the RCMP. G Division's Operational Communication Center, located in Yellowknife, serves as the vital link between the public and police, gathering critical details about a call for service while reassuring and comforting callers until help arrives. Operators receive emergency and non-emergency calls for service 24/7 from the general public, first responders, and other public service agencies. The G Division Operational Communication Center has 21 improved positions. Much like other areas of providing policing services, the OCC faces specific challenges that impact their abilities to operate. Recruitment and retention remains a challenge for the OCC and G Division at this time. Steps that we have taken to meet these challenges include the OCC conducting a major recruitment drive to fill positions. The RCMP, Department of Justice, and ECE working together to create an entry-level program that will give candidates the skills they need to be successful in the recruitment process. I've also tasked employees to look for ways to get more Aboriginal candidates for the OCC, in which to date we have received 5 interested applications in the past 4 months. The next section refers to how the RCMP and G Division has responded to addressing the concerns of family violence in the territories. As part of the RCMP's response to addressing family violence in the Northwest Territories, G Division created the position of a family violence coordinator in 2012-2013. The role of the family violence coordinator is to review all family violence-related investigations, ensure they are investigated appropriately and in accordance with the RCMP policies and procedures, liaise with Domestic Violence Treatment Option Court and Wellness Steering Committee, ensure proper documents are provided to the Domestic Violence Treatment Option Court, and assist as needed, assist members in receiving the training and emergency protection orders, Ontario Domestic Assault Risk Assessment, as well as a Sexual Assault Investigators course. Liaise with numerous non-government organizations in the territory, including the Native Women's Association, Coalition Against Family Violence, Victim Services, and Status of Women Council of the Northwest Territories. In the last year, 968 files have been referred to the Family Violence Coordinator, with 591 male offenders identified and 146 female offenders. Family Violence Coordinator continues to work with new and current members to ensure proper scoring of police files and ensure accuracy of the data input. On February 3rd, 2017, the Globe and Mail published a report titled Unfounded, wherein they outlined a 20-month-long investigation into how police handled sexual assault allegations. Obtaining data from more than 870 police forces across Canada, the Globe and Mail found that every province and territory was closing a quarter of all sexual assault complaints as unfounded. In the Northwest Territories, this rate was approximately 30%. The division has reviewed these files and now sits at 11% for 2017 and 15% for 2018. A national review has subsequently conducted to address the issues identified in the Globe findings. Now investigations that do not result in cleared by charges or others are reviewed by a sexual assault review team outside the division. This culminated in the RCMP publishing a report in December 2017 titled The Way Forward, the RCMP Sexual Assault Review and Victim Support Action Plan. This document included the following actions: police training and awareness action. Over the past number of years, about 20 members in G Division are provided with the Sexual Assault Investigators course. Plans continue to be underway to continue the Sexual Assault Investigators course on a yearly basis, making the adoption and changes needed to ensure that we continue doing thorough and proper investigations. All RCMP members in G Division are required to complete the Consent Law and Common Sexual Assault Myths course, specifically created to address issues identified in the RCMP Sexual Assault Review and Victim Support Action Plan. Implementation of division-wide policies have been implemented regarding the process of taking statements with regards to sexual assault files, including trauma-impacted statement courses. All sexual assault investigations deemed unfounded are being thoroughly reviewed by a district advisory NCO and a senior NCO of G Division. Departmental officials in the RCMP are exploring alternative options for victims to report sexual assaults, such as third-party reporting, as well as the potential for external review committees. The RCMP, Department of Justice, and victim service providers continue to explore options for sexual investigations that acknowledge the challenge victims face in reporting these serious crimes, but still allow for thorough investigations. The RCMP Victim Services have committed to working closely together to improve and maintain positive working relations. I recognize and understand the concern that people have brought forward as to the impact of these files and the nature of how the victim and the RCMP is committed to reviewing, improving our policies and processes to ensure the victims feel confident in reporting these offenses. That concludes my presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Chief Superintendent for a presentation. I just want to make some comments and ask a question. I think you guys have a very difficult job of policing people in the small remote communities or just anywhere. I guess it's the nature of the job and the people that you have to deal with day in and day out. Recently, I made a presentation on family violence, or we made member statements on family violence one day, the majority of us. And as I was going through the statistics, I noticed that violent crimes, not so much family violence, is not really segregated. It was all as one family crime. Violent crimes, and I noticed violent crimes in my riding over the two communities that were reflected individually for resolution in Hutzalka. On average, the violent crimes dropped by over 40%. I'm wondering if you have a feel for why that has occurred. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
Sorry, I missed the comment. It has dropped by 40% or increased? Dropped by 40%. So there's lots of reasons that that may have happened. Once again, we're talking about statistics. So we are. So ensuring that that the information is being recorded properly is key. The second thing, awareness of family violence, better education on how to prevent that, to recognize various warning signs as the cycle moves forward, better knowledge by community members about domestic violence and the importance of it and stuff allows for people to make better choices. I believe that we are part of that solution, but it comes back to the communities. What's acceptable in the community is what the community allows to happen, and so as a group, we need to ensure that. That could be a reason why the drop is better education.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you. I wish I had the numbers for alcohol consumption. I know it's high. I know it's high across the territory. I'm not sure that it's dropped significantly, but I would guess that at the same rate that the alcohol consumption drops, the violent crime rates go down. A question I have is, are you guys anticipating any change in the type of crimes that in as far as violent crimes go? I guess maybe any change as a result of the legalization of cannabis.
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
So I don't think that we can anticipate or prepare for what's going to happen in the future based on the consumption of cannabis. There is people out there that talk about cannabis leads to non-aggressive behavior. The one thing, however, as you've mentioned, is the alcohol consumption. Often alcohol and cannabis are consumed together at the same time frame. So for me to sit here and say that I anticipate it to drop, I'm not in a position to do that, so.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming here today. I don't think that we've met with you since we were elected 3 years ago, and so I'm glad you're able to join us today. You may be aware that I've asked lots of questions in the Assembly of the Justice Minister about the relationship between the RCMP and women, which wasn't great, and then the woman was taken to the cells. And I think that at that point, the trust between women and the RCMP may have declined even further. So my overall question is, what can you do in the NWT to rebuild that relationship of trust between women and the RCMP? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
So I don't necessarily agree that we have a poor relationship with women's groups or societies. Our members are engaged with many of the women's groups in the territories, not only in Yellowknife but across the territories. We have the feedback that I've received from the various communities that I visit and the people that I talk to talk about a positive relationship. So they do. Is there things that we can do better, things that we need to continue to develop? Without doubt. There's not a checkbox that says we met with X amount of groups or anything like that. It is something that needs to continue to move the bar forward. We are committed as an organization, as detachment commanders, to be open to criticism, to take a look at our policies and our procedures, and to make improvements where we can.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank you for your answer. I was talking about women generally rather than women's groups representing women. And so I'm interested to hear that you want to move the bar forward, and I'm wondering what that means in the context of improving the relationship between the RCMP generally with women generally. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
So once again, I'm not sure about a relationship with the female gender. We have lots of partnerships with females. We've worked on lots of programs with females. We continue to work with the female gender. We continue to be open. Again, we review our policies to make sure that people are feeling comfortable to come to us. We have female officers. We give cultural sensitivity and training to our membership. So to comment on what I'm going to do specifically or what the organization is going to do specifically to reach out to every female in the territory, we continue to be open and engage in our communities at social events, at sporting events, at society or social groupings, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Nutley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank the RCMP for giving us an overview in terms of where we're at and some of the issues we're facing in the NWT. I know there's an effort to try to recruit more Aboriginal First Nations, and they're I think on the first, second slide, there's a note of Aboriginal Community Constable program, and there's 4 positions that were noted that exist. Is there plans to maybe expand that program and trying to recruit more First Nations within the RCMP?
Thank you, Mr. Nutley. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
Sorry, so without doubt, so just to clarify, those 4 Aboriginal Community Constable programs are 4 positions that have a different funding mechanism between the GNWT and the federal government. Okay? As for the recruitment of Aboriginal members, we have many programs out there right now that we are doing to bring more people from Aboriginal communities and groups into the RCMP across the country as well within the territory as regular members. And I would love to see more Aboriginal members outside of those 4 positions. And if we have the more Aboriginal members than those 4 positions, we will make sure they have employment with us, so we do. We've had youth go down to Depot for 2 weeks. We've done summer student programs. We have done recruiting initiatives towards Aboriginal people. We have contract Aboriginal policing position in the territory that goes out and meets on a regular basis with communities. We have a proactive recruiter that goes out there targeting Aboriginal people. We have a Métis position that also goes out and looks at recruiting.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Nedley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think that gives me a clear understanding in terms of the distinction between the positions of Aboriginal Community Constable program plus the regular process of trying to recruit more Aboriginal First Nations. Is there a reason why there's how these positions are structured? I understand there's a position in Wati, Fort Simpson, and Fort Good Hope, and there's another 4th position. Is there correlation of maybe having these 4 positions with maybe the 5 tribes of the NWT, including I think there's the Quechua, Decho, Satu, the Indivaluit, and the Gwich'in? Is there a structure of that nature that there's maybe along the lines of creating another position? Let's see.
Thank you, Mr. Nedley. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
So the creation of any additional First Nation policing positions would be through negotiations with Public Safety Canada and the GNWT. Because as I said, it's a specific funding model that's associated to it. So I know that the federal government has announced some further funding for First Nations policing, and I know that the GNWT is working to obtain some of those fundings through consultation with us for potential locations, and we will wait to see what happens with that.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too want to thank you for coming here and communicating with us and making a presentation and answering our questions. And I see a lot of positive changes. When I grew up, the RCMP had dog teams. You no longer have dog teams anymore, so that's how advanced our society has increased. But in those days, in similarities, there's a connection with today's society, and I see that and I hear that when you're saying partnerships. In those days, it was quite common for the RCMP to help the trapper and the family by going out there, bringing mail, bringing groceries. So that really builds up trust, and what you're doing now, I think, is really, really great, going above and beyond your civic duties. Like, I just highlight my page here. Family Violence Coordinator is an example of going to the root of the problem and trying to assist in whatever consultation process that you've developed. So by going to the band offices and sitting down with the chief and having a coffee and sharing the statistics helps educate the leaders where their community is going. I'm originally from Fort Goodhoe. I know where the level of violence was and where it is today. And I don't like what I see today. But it's influenced by a lot of various drugs and alcohol. But I think through education, we can really make a difference. And I also see in your recruiting area, that wasn't there before. You had special constables at the time, but now you're actually having staff that are Aboriginal on your workforce. Those are positive things. And I encourage you to continue your advocation for minimizing crime through prevention, consultation, education, those types of systems that are out there. But there's always room for improvement. Take the incident in Cove Lake here recently. There was a wedding. If the G Division was proactive, the accident of somebody getting thrown down for whatever the reasons was, there was no RCMP in presence in that community of Cove Lake during the wedding, and of course there was a big party and so on. So it resulted in a middle-aged man, cousin of mine, laying in the bed in Edmonton currently, and he may be paralyzed from the waist down. So that's just an example of and that's all we can say in this situation is if the G Division was there, not constantly patrolling 24 hours a day, but just the presence probably wouldn't have encouraged that incident to happen. And I do know and I do respect your duties and your members' duties. We have a life too, and I respect that. But I also recognize there's balance out there. What is that balance? And I think through communication, as you mentioned, every community is different. Once we can find that balanced approach on providing positive impact to the substance abuse that's plaguing probably all of our communities, more so in some. But I just share that, and I encourage you to move on the way you're going, and I respect your efforts in this line of profession.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. Do you have a question for the
No,
superintendent?
it was more of a experience from the community. You know, the more we communicate, the more we understand that things that are going on out there, because we live in a small community.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McNeely. Mr. Blake? Oh, sorry, Chief Superintendent.
Sorry, I agree 100% with you, and a lot of things you said. This is why we move forward with not putting in a plan at a divisional level for every community, because they don't work. They need to be individualized, and that communication back and forth. If our members are aware, such as a wedding as you spoke of, in advance, then the expectation from my chair is they make arrangements to have people into the community for those events. We move bodies into communities for cultural events all the time. I'm sure many of this table have been to AGMs where in small communities that don't have policing, and members have gone in for those events. It's that communication that we continue to need to work on a regular basis, and why I say we will never be able to check the box off that we've hit the note. The more we have, the more we're going to need to have in the future to continue those relationships. So I certainly appreciate every comment you made, And we will strive to continue to work with every community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few things. As you know, in the past, we had a very successful part of the RCMP, which was special constables, and I know many things have changed since then, but I think that moving forward, I think we have to go back to that model, especially under recruitment of Indigenous officers. Even in the last 20 years, I haven't seen very many people being recruited by the RCMP. I know when I was, like say, 15 years ago, there was a couple of friends and relatives that were interested in being RCMP, and they had summer jobs, which was great, and that's what you always want to strive for. But since then, there really hasn't been very much in that area. Just a couple of years ago, I know there was one young feller in Nuvik that had a summer position, and that is great. I encouraged him, but I think we need to see more of that. And how is the department going into the schools and trying to encourage and having those positions available during the summer or at any time? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Was there a question to your? Oh, sorry about that, Mr. Blake. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
Sorry, I agree with you 100%. I'd love to have more people from the Northwest Territories employed by the RCMP in the territories, and quite honestly across the country. So I would. We do quite a bit of recruiting in the territories. We've had 3 people from the territories go into depot this fiscal year already. Special constables, as was mentioned earlier, back in the day of the dog teams, were no longer there anymore and stuff. It's been an evolution of our organization. We have, I think it's been about 8 years since we had a special constable troop go through depot. We had a couple people out of this division go through on that troop. I'm happy to say that most recently one of those special constables has converted to a regular member. It remains in this territory. We continue to do the recruitment. As I mentioned, we've sent youth to various programs in Regina, summer employment, and it's trying to keep those people engaged in the process. Unfortunately, our recruiting time from I'm interested in becoming a member to arriving in depot is a long process due to the security clearances and the various aspects of the recruiting stage. We are working on that to try and get that down to a shorter time period. We are also are looking at different options to expedite some applicants surrounding Indigenous people. But we want to make sure that the people that we are bringing into the organization are of the quality and competency level that we all expect. So we do, and that they're there based on their skill set. We will continue to recruit. We'll continue to focus and try to recruit as many people into the organization from the territories.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Blake.
Thank you. The other thing is rotation of officers. It seems like, every time we have good sergeants or good officers, whether it's in Fort McPherson, they service Sigachik, when we have officers in the community, you just notice how quiet it is compared to when everybody knows they're not in town, especially on weekends. And with the rotation of officers here, it seems like soon as everybody's comfortable with them and good communication then it's time for them to move on, like, I'd just like to ask, what's that, the rules against that, like, say if an officer wanted to stay in one community, do they have that option, or is it mandatory they move on to communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Superintendent Zettler?
Certainly, sir. It's not something that is new to myself, hearing comments like this, so I do. So, number one, and especially in small communities, the members are on duty pretty much 24/7. That takes a lot of, has a lot of impact on them, on their personal lives, on their families and stuff, as you can imagine. We do have lots of members that when their 2 or 3 year time in that post is due, do express an interest to stay in the community. And we take a look at that to make sure that it's something the community wants as well. I'm sure everybody at this table is in their life has experienced officers that they couldn't wait for that 2 or 3 year period to expire, and they were moving on. So we take a look at if the community's interested. We take a look and make sure that the member is still doing a good job, because ultimately keeping somebody in a community that the community likes but is not enforcing the laws as required also has some impacts, and that changes. After that, we have a meeting with them, making sure that they're staying for the right reasons and stuff. And if we determine that's something we're willing to support, we will. Lots of our members, after they take a look at that, will say, yes, I want to stay, or some will say, no, you're right, maybe I should move on, and they go on to another community and do a bang-up job in that community as well. I think that it's unfair to expect a member who's doing a good job to stay in one community for their whole service, or 5 or 6 years, because people in the community will also say, what are you bringing to us new that's now, and stuff. So something we look at, but not something that we necessarily just give a blind check to that they can stay.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. I just have a couple of questions, and I got about 1,000, but I guess the first one, just to follow up on Mr. Blake's question. Formerly I was a JP, and I was in the community, and that there is something that the communities are looking at. If there's a really good member, and they seem to want to stay there, but it just seems that the rotation is, 2 or 3 years and you got to move on. But, we have people that move down south and they can stay in the community for long periods of time. So can you please explain, you explain a little bit, but why is it different up in north than it is down south? Why do members have that opportunity down south to stay in one community, whereas here in the north, it's like a rotation, except for more so Yellowknife, where you have the advancement or opportunity to move around to different divisions and that. Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler.
So the Northwest Territories G Division is 5-year commitment. So when members come to the territory from across Canada, we ask that they commit for 5 years. Often down south, as they transfer into a province or division down there, there's no end to that commitment. At one stage, members could expect going to the province or division that they came out of depot and doing their whole service in that without an opportunity to move across Canada. The other impact is that down south, often a member can live in one community and police 2 or 3 different detachments because they're not on call as much. The detachment may be bigger, more central located, as well as various amenities that don't exist in every community in the Northwest Territories. A member that comes with small children into a smaller community may be happy, enjoying the time, but as those children become a little bit older, they may want to have some different amenities that aren't provided in that community. So they may want to stay for a short period of time, an extra year, potentially two. We look at that to determine if it's the best for the member, best for the organization, and best for the community. The other aspect is, as we look at 2 and 3 year postings in the territory, we don't want to be removing all 3 members at the same time. So if a member is on a cycle, if we're talking about a 3-person post, and they're in there for a 2-year period, one member wants to stay an extra year, there's a potential that we're removing all 3 members from that community in the same year, because the other 2 members may not want to stay additional times. So there's a lot of factors that come into play to make sure that we're committed to keeping the community engaged with our employees. You know how difficult it can be when a new member comes in for the community to engage with them. Often they compare it to previous members, and not all of our members bring the same skill set. We ask them to build on what's happened in the communities.
Okay, thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. One question that Mr. Nadley talked about was Aboriginal Community Constable program there, and you talked about 4, but I heard 5 communities in there, so I may have mistaken where you're going. So those 4, what communities are impacted on those, and are those positions filled presently? Thank you.
So,
Chief Superintendent.
So, sir, the 4 communities that have Aboriginal Community Constable positions are Bay Choco, Inuvik, Fort Simpson, and Fort Good Hope. All 4 of those positions are currently filled in the division.
Thank you. Ms. Green.
Thank you. I'd like to continue my line of questioning before, and I realize I might not have been specific enough to really give the question some meaning. So what I'm talking about here is trust. I think as a woman reading the Unfounded series in the Globe and Mail, I questioned the point of reporting sexual assault to the RCMP, given the kind of response that was reported in general about how those cases were handled. And so it's rebuilding that trust that I'm talking about, and I know the RCMP have this document, The Way Forward, which deals specifically with that. So 2 things that have come up in connection with this, and which you referenced in your presentation, is having third-party oversight of case review, and also having a third-party reporting mechanism. I know both of those things exist in the Yukon, and I'm wondering what it would take to have them exist in the NWT. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
So first off, I'm just going to clarify, it's not third-party oversight, okay?
It's a third-party member, sorry.
It's a third-party review, okay? So currently, the RCMP, the Department of Justice, are looking at what options there is within the territory and to how that would look. The RCMP and the Department of Justice have a working group to take a look at what we need, how best it could work in this territory, with the hope of moving forward. I do not have a timetable on when that may be. I'm aware that there is areas that have both of those processes in place already. But once again, it has to, for us to have trust in those processes and the community have trust in those processes, it has to work here. I'd hate to take a process that's developed someplace else that doesn't have the support resources and have it fail and the communities not have faith in that process.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Ms. Green?
Those are good caveats. There's no point doing it by half measures. I heard you say that there is no timetable, and it's not like this is an urgent issue, but I'm happy to hear that the working group is looking at the third-party review. Are they also looking at third-party reporting of the kind they have at Cauchy's Place in Yukon? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Chief Superintendent Zettler?
They are looking at third-party review, third-party reporting.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Natalie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in reference to communities without detachments, and I serve 2 communities that don't have detachments, of course. So there's the Hay River Reserve, Enterprise, and Kakiza, and just kind of I know realistically, detachments won't be established in those small communities, but I'm just kind of curious as to what ways that the RCMP is, trying to enhance at least their presence in small communities. I understand, like on the next page, it outlines the, operational model for smaller communities, but I mean, with the idea that, their violence, especially for family violence, is on an increase, or is that at crisis levels? How can small communities or residents of small communities be reassured that the RCMP would be at their beckon if they're needed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. Chief Superintendent Zettler?
So every detachment that is responsible for policing a community that doesn't have a detachment has a plan of how to get to that community for a call for service. There's opportunities, some communities where they're roadable, some have seasonal roads. We have processes in place for our members to fly into those communities urgently. We continue to work with the community to identify processes and response, so the members have somebody to call to get information, accurate information as to what's happening. We have contacts in those communities. We rely on the communities to help us if we have to fly in, to make sure there's a vehicle there for us to get us to the calls for service. We talk with the community members there with regards to safe plans in case there's something that's going to take us an hour to get there because of the distance, ensuring that that's in place and whatnot. I'm not sure if that answers your question fully, or.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Natalie?
Yeah, just to clarify too, the communities that don't have detachments, say like Akiza, Enterprise, and Hay River Reserve, are treated like communities that do have detachments, and just to be clear, have an opportunity to develop annual policing plans with, of course, the cooperation of the RCMP. Let's see.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. Chief Superintendent Zettler?
That's correct, sir. They do have that opportunity. The detachment that's responsible works with those community leaders to make sure that their priorities are met and what they are.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to keep it short. I know we're running out of time here, but it's been brought up a number of times, especially in my riding, that both the investigation and charges for people selling the harder drugs like crack cocaine. I know you're doing a good job down here on Yellowknife, but there's growing concerns that these drugs are making it to the communities, and it doesn't seem like I haven't seen any charges lately, in these cases. So are there investigations in the smaller communities to make sure that these drugs don't make it to the community? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Chief Superintendent Zettler?
Without a doubt, sir, there is investigations that are ongoing in those communities or in communities across the territory. Certainly, there is some challenges in smaller communities, as we all know. We obviously rely on people providing us with information about those type of investigations, and sometimes that's difficult in a smaller community. We promote Crime Stoppers and provide information through that way for people. One thing that I have heard in the past, not only in this territory but across in my the other provinces that I've worked, is often people would comment that they call the police, they get the Operational Communication Center, and then across the scanner they would hear the OCC ask the member to call so-and-so because they had information on drugs. We have changed our radio system in the last number of years, so it's encrypted now, so people can feel confident that as they call the police, they get the Operational Communication Center, any information that's being passed on over the radio is not being scanned and listened to by other people in the community. So we've seen an uptake of people providing that information, and we continue to continue those investigations, not only within Yellowknife but outside as well.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Mr. Blake.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last one is, what's the sort of recruitment for having Indigenous people in top-level positions within the G Division? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Chief Superintendent Zettler.
So we have several Indigenous members that are at senior NCO ranks in the territory. We have a number of corporals as well, which is our junior NCO rank. I just confirmed with Superintendent Jones that we do not have anybody Indigenous heritage in our officer rank at the inspector and above level. We do continue to work to develop all of our members, including Indigenous people, with the ideal to bring them into the senior ranks.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler. Just recognizing the time, we'll have to, call it short because we have session to come into. I greatly appreciate you both coming in. I think we'll probably have another invitation to ask for more questions as we move forward. We appreciate you coming in and the work that the staff is doing for the residents of the Northwest Territories. Do you have any closing comments, Chief Superintendent Zettler?
I'd just like to thank you all for the opportunity to come and speak on these important matters. We continue to engage with our communities. The senior officer level heads out to every community to meet with the leaderships on a regular basis. I think so far this year we're probably somewhere around 35 visits out to the communities by the officer cadre, and we will continue to. Once again, we are not perfect, but we continue to review our policies and make sure that when we identify concerns that we're either changing those policies to address those concerns, or we're ensuring that our members are held accountable for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Zettler and Superintendent Jones. We'll just wait for the people to clear the room, and then we'll just have a brief wrap up for committee. Thank you.